Commander Jake Morrison stood on the observation deck of the UDF Constellation and watched the stars through the massive window in front of him. The ship hummed quietly as it moved through space on routine patrol near the outer colonies. Everything seemed peaceful until the communication officer called out that an unknown transmission was coming through on all frequencies. Jake turned toward the main display screen and waited as the bridge crew worked to decode the signal. Within seconds, a holographic image appeared in the center of the bridge and everyone fell silent. The figure that materialized was unlike anything most of the crew had ever seen. It stood nearly 8 feet tall and wore armor so black it seemed to swallow the light around it. The being's face was angular and harsh with eyes that glowed faintly red. When it spoke, its voice echoed through the bridge like thunder rolling across a canyon. The creature identified itself as Warlord Krax the Unyielding and claimed to be the supreme commander of the Valkorian Empire. Jake felt his stomach tighten as he listened to what came next. Krax explained that his empire had conquered 47 star systems over 3,000 years of expansion. His species had never been defeated in war and had crushed every civilization that dared to resist them. Now he had turned his attention to humanity and the small cluster of colonies they had established in nearby space. The Warlord gave humanity a simple choice that was really no choice at all. They had 7 solar cycles to surrender completely and accept Valkorian rule, or face total destruction. To prove he was serious, Krax showed footage of burning cities and shattered planets. Entire civilizations reduced to nothing but ash and memory. But then something unexpected happened. Krax offered humanity one chance to avoid immediate annihilation. He claimed that no warrior in the entire galaxy had ever defeated him in personal combat. As proof of his superiority, and as a gesture of what he called mercy, he offered to face humanity's greatest champion in single combat. If the human fighter won, then the Valkorians would leave human space forever and never return. If Krax won, then humanity would surrender immediately without any resistance. The Warlord gave them 3 days to decide and choose their champion before ending the transmission with cold laughter. The bridge erupted into chaos as officers tried to process what they had just heard. Jake immediately ordered the crew to send the transmission to Luna Station, where Admiral Helen Brooks commanded all human military forces. Within hours, an emergency council was assembled with military leaders and government officials from across human space. The debate was fierce and urgent. Some argued that the challenge was obviously a trap designed to humiliate humanity before destroying them. Others pointed out that intelligence reports confirmed the Valkorian fleet contained over 5,000 warships, and each one was more advanced than anything humans possessed. A conventional war would be suicide. Lieutenant Commander Amy Peterson presented research about Krax that made everyone in the room go quiet. She had found records of his combat history going back centuries. In 3,000 years, he had fought 1,247 documented duels against champions from dozens of different species. He had never lost a single fight. His opponents had included warriors enhanced with cybernetic implants and genetic modifications specifically designed to kill. They had sent creatures with natural advantages like superhuman strength or lightning-fast reflexes. All of them had failed and died on the arena floor. The council argued for hours about what to do. How could humanity possibly find someone capable of defeating an opponent who had been unbeatable for 3 millennia? Some suggested they should refuse the challenge and prepare for war, even though it was a war they could not win. Others wanted to accept the challenge but had no idea who they could send. The weight of the decision pressed down on everyone in the room because they knew that billions of lives depended on what they decided. Meanwhile, on Earth, in a small town in Montana, a man named Danny Cole was teaching a group of teenagers how to build emergency shelters in the wilderness. He had no idea that his name was being discussed in emergency meetings across human space. Danny had served 12 years in the UDF Marine Corps before retiring to live a quiet life, away from combat and politics. His military record showed 147 successful operations and commendations for expert marksmanship and hand-to-hand combat skills. But what made his file stand out was something harder to quantify. His commanding officers had noted again and again that Danny had a gift for unconventional thinking. He won battles by seeing solutions that nobody else could see, and by turning disadvantages into advantages. Back at Luna Station, a young officer named Lieutenant Ben Harris suggested something that seemed crazy at first. He argued that humanity should not try to send their strongest or fastest warrior, because they would simply be trying to match Krax at his own game. Instead, they should send someone who understood that humans did not win through raw power, but through adaptability and clever thinking. He pulled up Danny's service record and pointed out pattern after pattern of impossible situations that Danny had resolved through creative problem-solving. The room went quiet as people reviewed the files and began to understand what Harris was suggesting. Admiral Brooks made the final decision. She ordered a shuttle to Montana and went personally to recruit Danny Cole. When the military shuttle landed near the forest where Danny was working, he knew immediately why they had come. Part of him had hoped they would forget about him and let him live out his days in peace teaching survival skills to kids. But when Admiral Brooks herself stepped out of the shuttle, Danny understood that this was not a request he could refuse. She looked him in the eye and told him that humanity needed him, not because he was the strongest fighter they had, but because he knew how to win when winning seemed impossible. Danny asked how much time he had to decide. Brooks told him he had no time, because humanity only had 3 days total to respond to Krax. He looked back at the teenagers he had been teaching and thought about all the people on Earth and in the colonies who would die if someone did not stand up to the Valkorians. He thought about his years in the Marines and all the times he had faced impossible odds. Then he looked at Admiral Brooks and told her he would do it. She nodded once and they walked together toward the shuttle that would take him to Luna Station, and toward a fight that would determine the fate of every human being alive. The arena hung suspended in the void of space, surrounded by transparent force fields that allowed viewers across the galaxy to witness what was about to happen. Danny stood on one side wearing standard UDF combat armor that looked painfully inadequate compared to what his opponent wore. Krax dominated the other side of the platform in his obsidian armor with weapons mounted on every surface of his body. The size difference alone was intimidating because Krax towered over Danny by more than a foot, and his build suggested strength that no unenhanced human could match. The neutral arbiter stepped forward to announce the rules. The arbiter was a member of the Sekari species known throughout the galaxy for their strict adherence to protocol and fairness. The creature's voice echoed across the arena as it confirmed that both participants had agreed to the terms of combat. Before the fight could begin, each fighter was allowed to make one request. The arbiter turned first to Krax, as tradition demanded for the one who issued the challenge. Krax's response boomed across the space. He requested nothing and declared loudly that he needed no advantages to defeat a mere human. The Valkorian fleet responded with sounds of approval that rumbled through their communication channels. Then the arbiter turned to Danny, and the entire arena seemed to hold its breath. This was the moment Danny had been preparing for since he first learned about the challenge. Every human watching from Earth and the colonies waited to see what he would ask. Danny spoke clearly so his voice would carry to every listener. He requested that before they fought, Warlord Krax must answer one question truthfully as his honor demanded. The request was so unexpected that the arena fell completely silent. In 3,000 years of challenges, nobody had ever made such a request. The Valkorians were famous for their obsession with honor and ancient traditions. To refuse answering a formal question in an official challenge would bring unbearable shame. Krax laughed, and the sound was like metal grinding against stone. He agreed immediately because he was confident that no question could possibly affect the outcome of their fight. He demanded that Danny ask his question so they could get on with the combat. Danny looked directly at Krax and asked something that seemed strange at first. He wanted to know if Krax had ever fought an opponent who wanted to lose. The question clearly confused the warlord. What kind of warrior would want to lose? Every fighter he had faced wanted to win and wanted to survive. Krax answered no, and then demanded to know what kind of ridiculous question that was. Danny explained in a calm voice that every opponent Krax had ever faced was predictable, because they all fought for victory. They all tried to survive and prove their strength and overcome the challenge in front of them. But what if Danny's real goal was not to win this duel? What if his true purpose was to ensure that humanity survived regardless of what happened to him personally? What if every action he took had a deeper purpose beyond simple combat? Krax dismissed this as psychological games and called for the arbiter to start the fight. The arbiter signaled and the combat began. Krax immediately activated his weapon systems. Energy blades extended from his gauntlets, glowing with power that could cut through steel like paper. Plasma cannons charged on his shoulders, ready to fire projectiles that would instantly kill an unprotected human. He was a walking arsenal perfected over thousands of years of warfare. Danny did not attack or even move forward. Instead, he backed away slowly while watching every movement Krax made. This seemed to anger the Warlord, who viewed the defensive posture as cowardice. Krax charged forward with incredible speed that should have been impossible for something so large. But Danny was not trying to match Krax's speed or strength. He was doing something completely different that only a few observers understood. As Krax swung his energy blade, Danny dodged at the last possible instant. The blade missed by centimeters, and Danny stumbled slightly as if barely surviving. To most people watching, it looked like Danny was getting lucky and would not last long. But aboard the Constellation, Dr. Lisa Grant watched the combat data with growing understanding. Danny was not dodging randomly. He was forcing Krax to move in specific patterns and positions. The fight continued for several brutal minutes. Danny took glancing blows that damaged his armor but did not take him out completely. He appeared to be losing badly and getting slower with each exchange. Krax grew more confident and started showing off. He spun his blades in elaborate patterns and made mocking gestures toward the human ships watching from a distance. He was demonstrating his superiority and making sure everyone in the galaxy saw how easy it was to defeat humanity's champion. Then Danny did something that nobody expected. He stopped moving defensively and charged straight at Krax in what appeared to be a desperate final attack. Krax easily sidestepped the clumsy charge and delivered what should have been a finishing blow. His energy blade struck Danny's chest plate with tremendous force. The impact shattered the armor and sent Danny flying backward across the platform. He crashed hard onto the arena floor and did not get up. Medical sensors monitoring the fight indicated severe injuries, including broken bones and internal trauma. Everyone watching believed it was over. Humanity had lost. Krax stood with his arms raised in triumph and turned toward the cameras to declare his victory to the galaxy. But then something strange happened. Danny began to laugh. It was a painful, gasping laugh, but it was genuine. He managed to speak through his damaged communication system. He thanked Krax for giving humanity exactly what they needed. Krax turned back confused and angry. How dare a defeated opponent mock him? What could Danny possibly mean? Danny explained through labored breathing that every moment of their fight had been recorded by thousands of sensors from multiple angles with unprecedented detail. Krax had just demonstrated his complete fighting style against a human opponent who was specifically trying to test every aspect of his combat abilities. More importantly, Danny continued, Krax had demonstrated something even more valuable than combat data. He had shown arrogance. Krax accepted a challenge from a clearly weaker opponent because he was absolutely certain of victory. He never considered that the real battle was not about winning this single duel. It was about gathering information that humanity could use to develop strategies and weapons and tactics. Whether Danny won or lost this fight, humanity now had everything they needed to know to fight back against the Valkorian Empire. Krax suddenly understood the trap he had walked into. The duel was never about one man defeating a warlord. It was about learning how to defeat an entire empire. Danny had sacrificed himself to gain knowledge that would save billions of lives. The Arbiter stepped forward because technically the duel was not over. Danny was still conscious and still capable of speaking, even though he clearly could not continue fighting. Krax faced a difficult choice. He could finish Danny and claim victory, which would give humanity a martyr, and prove that the sacrifice was meaningful. Or he could spare Danny and appear merciful, which humans would interpret as weakness or fear. Either choice undermined his position and damaged the aura of invincibility he had maintained for 3,000 years. Danny made one final statement that would echo across human space for generations. He said he could not defeat Krax here in this arena. That was obvious from the start. But he had already defeated the illusion of Krax's invincibility. Every human watching now knew that Krax could be studied and understood and countered. Humanity might not win today, but the Valkorian Empire would now face an enemy that would never stop learning, and never stop adapting, and never believe that any challenge was truly impossible to overcome. Krax stood over Danny with his energy blade raised high. The galaxy watched and waited to see what the Warlord would do. The decision he made in this moment would determine not just Danny's fate, but the future relationship between humans and Valkorians. Time seemed to freeze as Krax considered his options while Danny lay broken but defiant on the arena floor. Krax's energy blade remained raised above Danny for what felt like an eternity. The Valkorian fleet waited for their warlord's command to begin the destruction of humanity. The human ships braced themselves for the inevitable attack that would come once Danny was finished. In that frozen moment, billions of beings across multiple species held their breath, wondering what would happen next. Then Krax did something that shocked everyone watching. He deactivated his blade and lowered his arm. The Warlord's voice carried across the arena to every listener. He announced that Danny had not defeated him in combat, and that was an undeniable fact. But Danny had accomplished something that no opponent had achieved in 3 millennia of conquest. He had made Krax question his own certainty. Danny fought knowing he would lose, but ensuring that his loss would serve a greater purpose. Krax admitted that this was a form of courage he had never encountered before. It was not the courage of someone trying to win glory or save themselves, but the courage of someone willing to sacrifice everything for others. Krax declared that while Danny had technically lost the duel, humanity had not lost their spirit or their will to survive. He withdrew his original ultimatum that gave humanity only 7 cycles to surrender. Instead, he issued a new challenge. Humanity would have 50 solar cycles to prepare themselves. During that time, the Valkorians would not attack human space. But after 50 cycles, Krax would return and humanity would have to face him again. Not in single combat, but as an entire civilization defending itself. It was not the peace humanity had hoped for, but it was time. Precious time to prepare and build and adapt. Medical teams rushed onto the arena floor as Krax returned to his flagship. Danny was barely conscious but alive as they loaded him onto a stretcher. As the Valkorian armada began its withdrawal, something remarkable happened. Encrypted messages started arriving at human communication stations from sources within Valkorian territory. These were messages from the conquered species that the Valkorians had forced into their empire over centuries of expansion. Danny's sacrifice had inspired them. If humanity could stand up to Krax, then perhaps they could find the courage to resist as well. Danny was transported to the medical bay on the Constellation in critical condition. Dr. Lisa Grant led the team, working desperately to save his life. The injuries were severe, with broken ribs and internal bleeding and burns from energy weapons. His spine had been damaged, and the doctors were not sure if he would ever walk normally again. But Danny remained conscious and insisted on making a full report to Admiral Brooks. He needed them to understand what he had learned about Krax during their brief combat, and what humanity should do with their 50 cycles of preparation time. Admiral Brooks visited Danny as soon as the doctors allowed it. She informed him that his actions had bought humanity time and sparked something unexpected across the galaxy. Multiple species that had suffered under Valkorian rule were now reaching out to establish secret contact with humans. The galaxy had watched a human face impossible odds with courage and intelligence rather than surrender. Danny became a symbol of resistance, even though he was uncomfortable with the attention and heroic status. He insisted that he had simply done his duty and that the real work was just beginning. Over the following weeks, humanity mobilized in ways they never had before. The 50 solar cycles Krax granted translated to approximately 63 Earth years. An entire generation would grow up knowing that the Valkorians were coming back. Admiral Brooks assembled a special task force called Project Resilience, dedicated to analyzing every second of the arena footage and developing countermeasures to Valkorian technology and tactics. Lieutenant Ben Harris, who had originally suggested choosing Danny, was promoted and given an important role in coordinating the project's research efforts. Lisa Grant transitioned from medical work to leading scientific research on Valkorian weaknesses. Her first report identified 17 potential vulnerabilities in Krax's armor and weapon systems that had been revealed during the fight with Danny. Each vulnerability was small, but together they suggested ways that human technology could be adapted to exploit gaps in Valkorian defenses. The encrypted messages from conquered species became more frequent and organized. A resistance network emerged that called itself the Liberation Front. They viewed humanity as an unexpected symbol that it was possible to stand against Valkorian tyranny. Captain Greg Matthews was assigned to establish diplomatic contact with these rebel groups. The work was dangerous because it had to be done in complete secrecy to avoid Valkorian detection. But slowly, a network of allies began to form, united by their shared suffering under the Empire and their hope that things could change. 3 months after the arena fight, Danny was finally released from intensive medical care. He returned to Earth but found that civilian life was impossible now. Everywhere he went, people recognized him and wanted to thank him or ask for autographs or hear stories about facing Krax. Admiral Brooks offered Danny a new position, training the next generation of UDF soldiers. But not just in combat. She wanted him to teach them the kind of strategic thinking that had saved humanity in the arena. Danny accepted because he understood that his real fight was just beginning. The years passed and humanity transformed itself. 5 years after the challenge, they had successfully reverse-engineered key elements of Valkorian technology from the detailed scans taken during the arena combat. New weapon systems were being developed and tested. 15 years in, and the first generation of ships specifically designed to fight Valkorians launched from orbital construction facilities. The UDF Defiance, commanded by Captain Matthews, became the flagship of a new fleet that incorporated everything humans had learned. 25 years after the arena, Dr. Lisa Grant's research team achieved a major breakthrough in energy shielding technology. They developed shields that could withstand Valkorian plasma weapons by using frequency modulation patterns that disrupted the coherence of plasma bolts. It was based entirely on observations made during Danny's fight at 35 years in, and the Liberation Front had grown into a significant underground resistance spanning 12 different conquered species across Valkorian space. Humans provided covert support and training, helping these groups coordinate their efforts. 45 years after Danny faced cracks, an older and scarred Danny Cole oversaw the graduation of the 1000th class of strategists trained in his methods. These soldiers did not just know how to fight. They knew how to think creatively and turn weakness into strength and find victory in unexpected places. Year 50 arrived faster than anyone expected. Admiral Brooks, now in her 80s but still mentally sharp, received confirmation that Valkorian scout ships had been detected at the edge of human territory. Long-range sensors showed a massive armada mobilizing in Valkorian space. Krax had not forgotten his promise. He was returning exactly as he said he would. But humanity was no longer the vulnerable civilization that had faced him half a century ago. They had used every day of those 50 years to prepare and innovate and unite. The final confrontation was coming. Admiral Brooks stood on the bridge of the UDF Defiance alongside Captain Matthews and Dr. Lisa Grant behind them. Danny Cole, now a senior military advisor, reviewed tactical displays showing the disposition of human forces. The fleet that humanity had built was dozens of times larger and more capable than what existed 50 years ago. Every ship incorporated lessons learned from studying cracks. Every weapon system was designed to exploit Valkorian weaknesses. Every strategy was built on the foundation of adaptability that Danny had demonstrated. A transmission came through from Krax himself. His voice was unchanged by the decades. He announced his return and his intention to finish what he started 50 years ago. He asked if humanity was prepared to face the consequences of their defiance. Admiral Brooks responded with a simple message. She told Krax that humanity had learned from the best. They learned that the greatest victories come not from believing you cannot lose, but from knowing that even in defeat, you can still win. She invited him to test himself against a species that had spent 50 years preparing for exactly this moment. The Valkorian armada began to advance. The battle for humanity's future was about to begin. Danny arrived at Luna Station and was immediately taken to a secure briefing room, where Admiral Brooks waited with a team of military analysts and scientists. She did not waste time with pleasantries or try to make him feel better about the situation. Instead, she laid out everything they knew about Warlord Krax and the Valkorian Empire with brutal honesty. Danny appreciated the directness because he had never liked it when commanders tried to sugarcoat bad news. The truth was simple and terrible. He was not the strongest person they could send, or the fastest, or the most decorated soldier in human history. But after reviewing hundreds of candidates, the selection committee believed he had something more valuable than raw physical ability. He had proven time and again that he could see things others missed and turn weaknesses into strengths. Danny asked for access to every piece of information they had about Krax. For the next 3 days, he barely slept as he studied recordings of the Warlord's previous fights. He watched each video multiple times and took detailed notes about patterns and habits. He read anthropological reports about Valkorian culture and consulted with xenobiologists about their physical capabilities. The more he learned, the more he understood just how impossible this task really was. Krax was faster than any human and stronger by a significant margin. His armor was constructed from materials that could withstand weapons that would vaporize normal metals. His reflexes were enhanced by neural implants that made him react to threats in microseconds. During his preparation, Danny met Dr. Lisa Grant, who had been assigned as the chief scientist to help him. Lisa was skeptical from the start and did not hide her doubts. She told Danny plainly that based on every analysis they had run, the probability of a human defeating Krax in direct combat was effectively zero. Danny smiled at her honesty and said he appreciated working with someone who dealt in facts rather than false hope. Over the following days as they worked together, Lisa began to see what the selection committee had noticed. Danny asked questions that nobody else had thought to ask. He pointed out details in the fight recordings that even the military analysts had missed. One night, as Danny reviewed footage for probably the 20th time, he noticed something important. Every opponent Krax had ever faced made the same fundamental mistake. They all fought to win. They all tried to match his strength or speed or technology. They all believed that victory meant defeating Krax in direct combat. But what if that was not the real goal? What if the true victory was something completely different? Danny began to formulate a plan that was so unusual and risky that he almost did not want to share it. But when he finally explained his thinking to Lisa, she stared at him for a long moment before slowly nodding. It was crazy enough that it might actually work. Danny also noticed something else in the recordings that gave him a slim advantage. Before every fight, Krax followed the same ritual. He always granted his opponent one request as a show of his confidence and superiority. Most fighters asked for better weapons or favorable environmental conditions. Krax typically denied these requests or granted them in ways that made no real difference. But the ritual itself was important to Valkorian culture and honor. Krax would not break that tradition even against a human opponent. As news of the challenge spread across human space, the public reaction was intense and divided. Some people saw Danny as humanity's last hope and praised his courage. Others viewed him as a sacrifice being sent to die, so politicians could say they tried diplomacy before going to war. Protests erupted on Earth with crowds demanding that the government refuse the challenge and prepare to fight instead. But military experts made it clear in every interview that a conventional war with the Valkorians would be over in weeks with billions of casualties. The Valkorian fleet was simply too large and too advanced. On the UDF constellation, Captain Greg Matthews supervised the construction of the combat arena according to Krax's specifications. It would be a neutral space station positioned exactly between human and Valkorian territories. The arena itself was nothing fancy, just a circular platform 100 meters across surrounded by force fields. No weapons except what each fighter brought with them. No interference from outside. No rules except one simple condition that the fight ended when one person could not continue. Matthews hated the whole setup because it reminded him of gladiatorial combat from ancient Earth history. But he understood that humanity had no choice except to play by Krax's rules. Danny spent his final days before the fight in intensive physical training, but he devoted even more time to mental preparation. He meditated for hours and reviewed his research and refined every detail of his strategy. He also wrote letters to his family in case things went wrong. He tried to explain in those letters why he was doing this and what he hoped to accomplish. The words were hard to find because how do you tell the people you love that you are walking into certain death? But he wanted them to understand that some things were worth dying for, and sometimes the only way to win was to be willing to lose. The night before his transport to the arena, Lisa visited Danny in his quarters. She had grown to respect him deeply over the past few days, and could not shake the feeling that she was sending a friend to die. She told him that regardless of what happened, he had already given humanity something precious. He had given them hope that humans could face impossible odds without surrendering or breaking. Danny thanked her and said he hoped that hope would be enough. They talked for a while about small things unrelated to the fight like favorite foods and childhood memories. It felt important to remember that life was about more than combat and survival. The transport ship departed Luna Station early the next morning, carrying Danny along with Admiral Brooks and a small crew. The journey to the neutral station would take 8 hours. During that time, the Valkorian armada arrived in the sector like a dark cloud blocking out the stars. 5,000 ships arranged in perfect formation surrounding the small station where the fight would take place. Their message was unmistakable. If Danny lost, there would be no escape and no second chances. The human fleet stayed at maximum distance and watched helplessly as events unfolded. Danny spent most of the journey alone in his quarters going over his plan one final time. He knew that every decision he made in the arena would matter. One wrong move or one moment of hesitation would end everything. But he also knew that he had prepared as well as anyone could. He understood Krax better than any human alive, and he had a strategy that just might work if he executed it perfectly. Admiral Brooks came to see him one last time before they arrived. She asked if he was ready, and Danny gave her a small smile. He said something that would be remembered for generations. He told her he was not there to match Krax's strength because that was impossible. He was there to prove that invincibility was just an illusion that existed only as long as people believed in it. The arena doors opened, and Danny stepped through them into the harsh light of the combat platform. On the opposite side, Warlord Krax the Unyielding waited in his black armor, bristling with weapons. The two fighters faced each other across the empty space while millions watched from across the galaxy. This was the moment that would decide whether humanity survived or perished. The Valkorian armada emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Sol system, like a dark wave rolling across the stars. 5,000 warships, each representing 3 millennia of conquest, arranged themselves in the formation that had broken countless civilizations before. The display of overwhelming force was designed to shatter enemy morale before a single shot was fired. But the human fleet did not retreat or panic or attempt last-minute negotiations. Instead, Admiral Greg Matthews, commanding from the UDF Defiance, ordered the fleet to advance into a formation that Krax had never encountered in all his centuries of warfare. Aboard his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, Krax observed the human response with interest rather than contempt. He had spent 50 years studying humanity during the reprieve he granted them. He learned about their history of wars and their tendency to fight among themselves over resources and ideology. He expected them to fracture during the waiting period and waste their preparation time in political squabbles. Instead, they had unified with a singular purpose that surprised him. They had used every single day to prepare for this exact moment. The first engagement began near Neptune's orbit. Valkorian military doctrine demanded a preliminary skirmish to assess enemy capabilities before committing the main fleet. A force of 200 warships broke from the main formation and advanced on the human defensive line. What happened next stunned every Valkorian commander watching. The human ships did not engage in traditional combat. They scattered in seemingly random directions, leading the Valkorian vessels into a three-dimensional maze. When the Valkorians pursued, they suddenly found themselves surrounded by automated defense, platforms that emerged from hiding places in Neptune's ice rings. The Valkorian ships took heavy damage before they could adapt to the new threat. The human weapons were different from what Krax remembered. They did not simply try to overpower Valkorian shields with brute force. Instead, they pulsed at specific frequencies designed to create resonance patterns that weakened shield integrity from within. This was technology developed by Dr. Lisa Grant's team, based directly on vulnerabilities observed during Danny's arena fight 50 years ago. Krax recalled the skirmishing force after learning what he needed to know. Humanity had not wasted their time. On Luna Station, Danny Cole coordinated with hundreds of tactical teams spread throughout the solar system. He was not in direct military command because younger officers handled fleet movements and combat operations. Danny's role was to anticipate Valkorian responses and provide strategic guidance based on his deep understanding of how they thought and fought. He had spent decades studying not just Krax's personal fighting style, but Valkorian military doctrine and cultural patterns. He knew how their commanders would react to different situations. The battle escalated over the following days as the Valkorian fleet pushed deeper into human territory. The fighting was brutal and costly. Humanity lost ships and orbital stations. Thousands of people died defending their homes. But for every human loss, the Valkorians paid a price they had not paid in centuries. Their ships were damaged by weapons they did not fully understand. Their formations were disrupted by tactics that made no sense according to traditional military theory. They were fighting an enemy that refused to be predictable. The turning point came when the Valkorian fleet reached Earth's moon. Krax himself led a strike force to destroy Luna Station, recognizing it as the command center for human operations. He planned to shatter human morale by obliterating their seat of power in front of the entire solar system. But Luna Station was defended by more than conventional weapons and ships. As the Valkorian fleet approached, they received a transmission broadcast on all frequencies. It was Danny Cole speaking calmly despite the approaching destruction. Danny addressed Krax directly. He reminded the Warlord that 50 years ago, humanity was given a choice between surrender and resistance. They chose to fight. Now Danny offered Krax the same choice. The statement was so audacious that Krax laughed. How could a species barely holding its own offer terms of surrender to him? Danny continued speaking and explained what humanity had really been doing for 50 years. They had not just built weapons and trained soldiers. They had been talking to every conquered species in the Valkorian Empire, every civilization forced to serve Krax against their will. And humanity had been sharing something precious with all of them. They shared hope. As Danny finished speaking, something unprecedented happened across the Valkorian Armada. Ships that had served faithfully for decades suddenly turned their weapons on each other. Entire sections of the fleet fell into chaos as crews of conquered species rose up in coordinated mutiny. The Liberation Front had been waiting 50 years for this exact moment. They had been organized and supplied and trained by human advisors working in secret. Danny's stand in the arena had inspired them. Now they were inspired again by humanity's continued resistance. Krax realized with horror what had really happened. The battle was never going to be won through military superiority alone. Humanity had done something no species had ever accomplished. They united all of Krax's enemies against him. The empire that took 3,000 years to build was tearing itself apart from within. But Krax was not defeated yet. He personally led his elite guard in a direct assault on Luna Station, determined to at least eliminate the human who had orchestrated his humiliation. The Eternal Dominion crashed through defensive lines, absorbing tremendous damage but pushing forward through sheer power. Krax and his warriors teleported directly to Luna Station's command center. They found Danny waiting along with Admiral Brooks and Dr. Lisa Grant. None of them carried heavy weapons. Danny stood with a simple combat blade, knowing he could never win a physical fight against Krax. The Warlord demanded to know how humanity accomplished this impossible feat. How did they turn his empire against him? Danny explained patiently. He told Krax that every conqueror makes the same fundamental mistake. They believe fear and strength are sufficient to maintain control. But Krax never gave his subjects anything to believe in except his invincibility. The moment Danny proved that invincibility was an illusion, he gave every conquered species permission to hope, and hope could not be killed with weapons or crushed with force. It spread like fire once people believed change was possible. Krax raised his weapon to strike Danny down but hesitated. Around him, his empire was collapsing as millions of beings rose up simultaneously. If he killed Danny now, the human became a martyr and proves that his sacrifice was meaningful. If he spared Danny, he appeared weak or frightened. There was no path to victory here. The battle was already lost, not through military defeat, but through something more devastating. The fear that held his empire together had been broken. Admiral Brooks made an offer. She told Krax to withdraw his forces and end the campaigns of conquest. Humanity would negotiate a peace that allowed the Valkorian species to survive with honor. Or he could continue fighting and watch his empire destroy itself from within. For the first time in 3,000 years, Warlord Krax faced a situation he could not resolve through combat. His entire worldview was built on the idea that the strong ruled and the weak submitted. But humanity had proven that weakness could become strength through unity and innovation, and inspiring others to resist. Krax made his decision. He lowered his weapon and contacted what remained of his loyal fleet. The Valkorians would withdraw from human space. But before leaving, he addressed Danny one final time. He admitted that Danny had defeated him 50 years ago in the arena. Krax had been too arrogant to see it then. Danny never needed to win the physical fight. He only needed to show the galaxy that Krax could be challenged and studied and understood. That demonstration was enough to change everything. The Valkorian fleet began its withdrawal from the Sol system. Across their former empire, negotiations started between newly liberated species and Valkorian forces. The empire would not disappear overnight, but it would never be the same. Krax had learned what humanity knew all along. True strength was not measured by the ability to conquer, but by the ability to adapt and unite diverse peoples toward common goals. In the aftermath, humanity began the long process of rebuilding what was damaged in the battle. The cost had been high, with thousands dead and stations destroyed. But the victory was profound. Not just survival, but the transformation of an entire region of the galaxy. Danny Cole, finally able to truly retire, stood at an observation window on Luna Station looking down at Earth. Lisa Grant joined him, and together they watched as ships from dozens of different species arrived in human space. These were new allies and friends, all connected by the shared experience of standing up to tyranny. Admiral Brooks approached them with news. The newly formed Galactic Coalition wanted Earth to host the first summit of free species. Humanity, which had nearly been erased from existence, would now help shape the future of interstellar relations. Danny reflected on the incredible journey. 50 years ago, he stepped into an arena believing he would die. He accepted that sacrifice because he understood something fundamental about his species. Humans excelled not because they were the strongest or fastest, but because they refused to believe any challenge was truly impossible to overcome.